Hello, everyone. Okay, I'm in a different space today, and I'm going to wait to see who else is going to join me. Taylor is here. Hello, Taylor. And I'm going to leave you on passive mode for the moment, as I'm going to be reading, and we'll open up the conversation at a later date, a later time, anyway. And there's the chat. So we'll wait for a few other people to show up. I just posted this, so we should be starting soon. And I'm hoping that this is all working and streaming properly, but it looks like it is. And yep. So this is all seems to be working properly. A little bit delayed. Okay. So let me switch this to the, can't minimize because I'm recording. Okay. So today I'm going to be reading from my translation of August Sanders' second radio lecture. And I assume everyone is hearing a bit of this clacking noise in the background. That's because I've got a different microphone set up, and I'm hoping that it will help make the sound a bit better than it was last time. So let's get into it. Today I'm at home, bit of different lighting, different background. I'm going to start. August Sanders' second lecture, Nature and Development of Photography, a retrospective and an outlook, from experiment to practical use. In my first lecture, I described the invention of photography and hinted at its value for the present. Today, I would like to continue with that path, or with the path that photography took into the public sphere and its relationship to society, and to art. I will also be looking at the emergence of the new profession of photography, as well as what happened to some of the older procedures. Daguerre and Nietzsche tried in vain to market their invention to business people and art lovers. They only finally succeeded with the French government. The physicist Jean d'Arago immediately and clearly recognized the importance of the invention and was instrumental in its acquisition by the French government. One condition he made was that the process not be patented. He concluded that such a great invention would only be inhibited in its further development by the patent being in the hands of an individual, and thought it would have unimagined successes in the hands of many. Daguerre and Nietzsche received a life pension from the French government to honor their importance for art, science, and folklore. It is significant that d'Arago immediately propagated that France had adopted the invention of photography and was proud to be able to give it as a gift to the whole world. He quoted reports by great artists and scientists who, almost without exception, expressed the same enthusiasm. He was not alone with his enthusiasm for the new invention. For example, Guy Lussac said, "This great discovery is the forerunner of a new art in the midst of an old civilization. It will make history and its fame will be preserved." Unfortunately, the details of the invention remained hidden to the general public initially. It is understandable that one looked forward to the veil finally being lifted. There must have been tremendous enthusiasm in Paris. I would like to quote a few sentences here from the account of a 17-year-old writer who was on a day trip to Paris to witness the baptism of the invention. He writes, quote, "As I, in the spring of 1839, as a 17-year-old, came to Paris for the first time, I was filled with the youthful hunger for knowledge. I stood for hours at a shop window on the quai where the first daguerreotypes were exhibited, trying to unravel the wonder of the images that filled the daily conversation in all circles. From there, I went to the State Academy to attend the celebration of the unveiling, but in vain, as the seats were all occupied all the way to the forecourt by a dense crowd. It was as if the crowd was celebrating a battle won. It was a victory, however, one far greater than a bloody one. It was a victory of knowledge, which the direct translation of the words was, it was a victory of the knowing spirit, which I thought was very interesting. Everyone rejoiced in and with the joy of the others. In the world of infinite progress, once again, a border had been breached, and humanity felt as if they were together in their common homeland. At the end of the celebration, I managed to work my way through the dense crowd, where I approached the scientists and asked for clarification. But one shouted, "Iodine silver," the other, "Mercury," and a third claimed that natron soda was the secret. Everyone pointed their ears, but no one could understand. It was only in the evening that the excited crowds disbanded to return to everyday life. The next day, the shops of the opticians were under siege, who could not find enough instruments to satisfy the incoming army of daguerreotypists. After a few days in Paris, three-legged peep boxes were planted on all squares and streets. All the physicists, chemists, and scholars of the capital were polishing silver plates. Those who had the means to do so rushed to the new invention, some out of love, others for speculative reasons. The working process of Daguerre to produce usable photographs in the camera obscura became available to every man on August 19, 1839, because the description of the invention was translated into all cultural languages immediately after announcement. As a result, the invention led to the creation of jobs everywhere, because the work process was discussed in countless essays and reports, and areas of application were being continually discovered. The publisher and editor of the first pamphlet focusing on the daguerreotype contained the following dedication to the inventor. And here, please excuse my French. Au grand homme le pêtre reconnaissant, which apparently means to the great men, the grateful fatherland. With frenzied speed, the invention began its triumphant spread through almost all the world. On September 6, 1893, the first cameras are said to have arrived in Berlin. And already, on September 16th, an optician from Berlin posted the first cameras of his own construction and put on display images taken with them. On October 2nd, 1893, the first improvements were reported, after which daguerreotypes could be produced in 25 minutes of exposure time. Throughout Germany, the invention was greeted with joy on the one side, but was also described as a Parisian hoax and met with suspicion and ridicule from the other side. The Leipziger Anzeiger published the following statement in the year 1839, which states, among other things, the greatest master of opticians, who enjoys the highest respect in Lindenau and Leipzig and across Saxony, and is first in his field in all German-speaking countries, who is also a citizen of Leipzig, has tried in vain to work with the new French invention. Despite his meticulous work with that camera obscura, he has not succeeded in producing an image. One has to assume that, if such a great German master of optics has thoroughly examined a new invention, and nothing has come of it, that the invention is a nasty Parisian hoax. The reporter added, to capture mirror images is not only an but the desire to do so is blasphemy. Man is created in the image of God, and God's image cannot be captured by any human machine. But a machine that wants to replace the genius of God, one which man alone wants to create, is, in my calculation, tantamount to the desire to reach the end of all creation. The man who endeavors to create such a thing must think smarter than the creator of the world. Although God has so far generously tolerated the mirror, which is the devil's vain toy, in his creation, he probably exercised this indulgence so that especially the females in the mirror can read the simplicity and the pride from their faces. But no mirror, neither its glass nor its mercury, has received permission from God to hold human faces within it. A mass illness of vanity-mad people will break out, because if every face can be given away and admired cheaply dozens of times, it makes humanity godlessly superficial and idle. And if every follower of Daguerre in Paris claims 100 times that he can capture the human mirror image on silver plates with his machine, this is 100 times an infamous lie, and it is not fitting that a German master of optics be beguiled by this cheeky claim. At the end of the article comes a small addendum. The idea of the revolution and that of Napoleon's desire to make Europe a single fraternal empire, all of these ideas are trumped by Mr. Daguerre because he wants to outdo the creator of the world. If this were possible at all, well-known men such as Archimedes and Moses would have done similar things long ago. But if these brightest men were unaware of captured mirror images, then the Frenchman Daguerre, who wants to boast of such outrageous things, can be called a fool's fool from the outset, just as any German who believes in a nonsensical invention must be called a donkey's ass. The Leipziger Anzeiger warned its readers seriously about the camera obscura. But while this newspaper warned its readers, everywhere successes were already being achieved because the act of photographing infected people. The painters recognized in photography a competitor, which could mean the destruction of the painting as they knew it. They first tried to compete with photography in a life and death struggle against the machine, which even the revolutionary Daumier joined. But soon they realized that photography could work with incomparably stronger technical weapons compared to the painting of the time. The smarter ones gave in and made photography their profession. Out of the early recognition of photography by these painters came a body of work, the excellence of which we still have the opportunity to wonder. At the same time, as already mentioned, physicists, chemists, and scholars worked on technical improvements. Thus, the spirit connected with material, and the heyday of photography arose. I would like now to explain the daguerreotype process in more detail. The daguerreotype is a photograph made on a silver-coated copper plate. It is a 5-step process. First, plate cleaning. Second, iodine coating. Third, exposure in the photographic apparatus. Fourth, smoking with mercury. And fifth, light resistance of the latent image using a fixture soda. Now, please excuse the term fixture soda. I'm still not quite clear how to translate that particular chemical substance. Natron is the German word for it. The plate consists of a 5/10 millimeter thick silver-plated copper plate. This has to be cleaned with triple or bone powder. The finer the polish, the better the picture. The clean plate was freed from any dust particles and placed on over dry iodine. The iodine vapors result in a light-sensitive iodine precipitation, which is followed by exposure in the camera, which at the time of Daguerre lasted 2 hours or more. With the low-light lenses of Chevalier, which had a maximum light intensity of 1:14, when dipped, portrait shots were impossible. So one was content with still life and landscape shots. In part by the improvement of the lens, whose luminous intensity was increased up to f3.5, as well as increasing the light sensitivity of the plate by adding bromine, the exposure time was reduced to seconds. The daguerreotype became more durable by adding gold to the fixation bath, today's clay tape fixing tape. At the same time, around 1840, Fox Talbot registered a method of photography in London, which was made on paper negatives and was named the Talbot type in his honor. The Talbot type. The Talbot type, which did not show the essence, i.e. the mirror image or the exact natural reproduction of the daguerreotype, had the character of a drawing. The paper negative had structure, which is called grain in its technical term. Talbot worked with silver nitrate and gallic acid and exposed in a wet process in the camera. Of these paper negatives, which were made transparent by means of wax, Talbot made positive copies on chlorine silver copying paper. He gave this method the name calotype, which was changed to Talbot type in his honor as the inventor. Talbot is thus the inventor of the photographic copying process. Due to the granular structure, the method had disadvantages compared to the daguerreotype, since it did not have the same resolution. This was already clearly recognized in the early days of photography. The photographers held firm to the daguerreotype because the larger audience liked the nice small pictures with their magnificent rendering. A number of other methods were also developed before the invention of the glass negative, but none could top the beauty of the daguerreotype. The Talbot type, which is more like an impressionist painting, was the foundation of painterly photography at the end of the 19th century, supported by impressionist painting itself and promoted by the aesthetics of the time. Around 1850, a new procedure was created called the collodion process. With this invention began the death of the daguerreotype. It was now possible to produce glass negatives, which was an undeniable step forward. The photograph became more common through this, while in the early days, it was a matter for the wealthy. What was to be welcomed on the one hand, however, became a disadvantage on the other, because as the profession spread, photography became a mass production process, with its advantages and disadvantages. The remedy to these disadvantages is reserved for a later time in history. The collodion process, which is still in use in reproduction institutions today, has almost the same subtleties in rendering as a daguerreotype does, since the light-sensitive layer is grainless. The collodion process and the invention of albumen paper resulted in a copying process that approached the daguerreotype. However, the first signs of decay occurred due to incorrect retouching. At this time, the photographer still produced his own plates and papers. Its studios were already created, which were geared to the commercial situation and produced up to 300 portraits in a year. Daily revenues were recorded of up to 1,500 marks. An English photographer delivered 25,000 paper photos in a very short time with the help of the collodion process. This figure was then far exceeded by the invention of the dry plate. The photographic process made rapid progress. While the process required a 2-hour exposure in 1839, Daguerre was able to achieve good results in 1941 with a 3.5-minute exposure. At the same time, the first instantaneous or second images were reported from Vienna. Photography now made its way into the scientific institutes. The first criminal albums, military photographs, photogrammetry, micro and X-ray photography, remote and color photographs, and cinematography, as well as photographic sound recordings. The first chair of photography was established in 1865 at an academy in Berlin. A private school had already existed in Jena in 1855. I would now like to explain the collodion process, also known as the wet process. Collodium iodine is poured on well-cleaned glass plates where it solidifies. In the darkroom, in a bowl, the plate prepared in this way is brought into contact with a silver nitrate solution. The light-sensitive layer is formed by the chemical interaction in the layers between the iodine and the bromide silver. Now the wet plate is exposed in the camera, which creates a latent, i.e. invisible photo image, which is in turn developed with iron vitriol solution and fixed in acid soda. Again, it's a term, the fixer soda, translation pending. Now we come to the paper process of the time, the albumin paper and salt paper. The latter was a fine writing paper soaked with table salt and then coated with a 10 to 12% silver nitrate solution. The albumin paper was a drawing paper prepared with chicken egg white and in the same way as salt paper, then coated with silver nitrate solution, but left to swim in the egg solution for up to 3 minutes. After drying, the paper treated in this way is ready for use and is exposed in daylight. Now, after this purely technical description of the development of photography, we can proceed to focus on the photographic image itself. We will see that the first excellent works of Daguerre and some others were followed by an epoch of decline, even though technology had continued to make progress. And that was round 2. And now I will invite our illustrious guests, the ever-present James D. and the ever-present Taylor Poole. Hello, gentlemen.
Hello.
There's Taylor. And James needs to turn on his mic and his camera, if he so chooses.
The term you're looking for is baking soda.
Natron, baking soda. Right.
Yeah. Sodium bicarbonate is baking soda.
Thank you. Hey, James.
Hey.
Hi, James.
Another view of your lovely backyard.
Yeah. It's in the 80s here today, so it's kind of warm.
Lucky you.
It's cold here. All right, now I need to see if there's any questions in any of the other channels here, because I'm apparently streaming in a number of different places. Turn on his mic and his camera. Channels here. Right. That's working. Okay. Never mind. Yeah, so this was an interesting process of translation because first off, I found it curious that August would step into the conversation around the spiritual aspect of photography. The Leipziger newspaper speaking that it's an abomination and in heresy to be a photographer, and with these very old school kind of ideas about if it were possible, then it would have been invented before, which is kind of like the die-hard argumentation against any kind of technological advancement. Like if this were possible, then somebody would have done it already, just like fire.
I missed the introduction. What was the date and who did this?
This was in the 1830s or 40s, I think. When photography, when the daguerreotype camera was, or the daguerreotype was introduced in Germany, a Leipziger newspaper wrote about it because apparently, at least from the text stated, a specialist in lenses and a chemist and a physician or physicist was not able to create a daguerreotype.
Okay.
And so the assumption was if this guy who's a master can't do this, well, then it's not possible.
Okay.
Even though there was evidence that that the lens or that they were there.
Right. And of course, Germans are infallible with mechanical and scientific challenges.
Exactly. Which, I think the entire idea that something can be, let me start that sentence again. So there's other hints. Hi, Susanna. There's other hints in there about August stepping into the intellectual and the artistic aspects of the medium. I found it fascinating that he also already addresses the initial connection of the mechanics of it and the spirituality of it. There's this one sentence in here which I highlighted. Let me see if I can find this quickly. Sorry. This is like 24 pages of translated text, and I didn't get around to highlighting everything I wanted to step into or to mention. Anyways, but he speaks about the point where it's the first merger of technology and creativity. And also the way he expands on the impact it had on painting, and particularly the mention of the early post-painter photographers and the great work that they did, and that being something that that people at the time could then go back to and actually still enjoy, which I think would be a fascinating thing to do, to look at that aspect of photography. And if for those of you who don't know it, August Sander was a painter as well. He just wasn't a very good painter. Compositionally, he was very good, but his skill as a painter, like his use of color and drama inside of the color usage on his canvases, was really not very good. We have a couple of them floating around, which I think is interesting, because it lines up with the idea of photography of being accurate. In photography, the idea is that you see exactly what the camera captures, which we now understand is not true. But it is kind of the underlying idea that in reproductive photography, meaning non-influenced photography through any said medium or influence, is something that always kind of renders accurately. And in painting, the accurate rendering doesn't come only through accurate color usage, but may very well be more accurate by using colors that absolutely don't match because of the way they impact the eye and the way you see. And I think August, caught on to that. I'm excited for next week because I think he then gets into the nitty gritty of, the spiritual in photography and his understanding of the medium and its role. So
that's interesting. Yeah, I found it really, really interesting how the Leipziger Zeitung or whatever the Leipzig newspaper was saying that it's an abomination because we're all made in the image of God, and who dare to recreate an image of people, which I don't like. If they have that mindset back then why was painting portraits any different than taking a photo?
Yeah.
And
yeah, it's an interesting question. It's I spoke to this briefly last week with the operation of my eye and my understanding of how vision has changed. And there's other areas where this can be seen. If you look at a single photographer's work who has produced their own prints in the darkroom, with age, the eyes become more contrasty. And so there seems to be this nature that later prints tend to be more contrasty than earlier prints because of the way the vision changes. The eyes, our eyes get old with time, clearly.
Well, I think with cataracts, they get a little less contrasty, so the prints were made more contrasty to compensate for that loss of contrast in vision.
Good point, James. I stand corrected, or I sit corrected.
Although I had cataract surgery, so I still have normal contrast.
Okay.
It helps.
So yeah, and I think we're part of that conversation is going to invariably end up in a conversation around our ability to comprehend the world around us. Like, what are we seeing? How are we seeing it? And the arts have always been one of the key proponents of helping people to understand the world around them. And as my wife was looking at a film about the Pope, the current Pope, and I stepped in like in the last minute of the film because she was sitting in the living room. But I joined her, and he speaks about the artist, and he says, the arts are one of the greatest things that we as humans have, because they give us a chance to step into a higher understanding of things, and artists are the ones who help facilitate that. And I think that is a really, really important aspect. Not only the role of the artist as a person of import inside of the world and our understanding of it, but also to understand that that's a very specific part of everything that we do. That we could have endless discussion about trying to find an object in your house that wasn't designed by an artist. You can't, unless you go in the backyard and like pull a plant out of the backyard.
Mm-hmm.
The impact of creativity in our everyday lives is omnipresent.
Mm-hmm.
If it's good design, that's a different conversation, right? All the ugly stuff, but
I wonder if people back then had a hard time with photography and calling it an abomination because it had like maybe seeing the use of so much chemicals. Maybe they were saying, okay, this is man-made. This is like man is trying to make something that shouldn't or doesn't need to be there, which I guess with painting, I think of oils, and they would take flowers and dirt and water and they would grind it, and that was paint. And so maybe painting was viewed a little bit more holy because you're using even bugs or like natural products to create something, rather than, I don't know, bringing all these chemicals together. And maybe it looked a little bit spooky back then as well.
Well, I think the spookiness aspect of it is accurate. I don't think the chemical process was an issue, because I don't think anyone at that time had any concerns with chemicals at all. The entire the poisoning through chemical processes was something that was ran parallel to the industrial development, and it wasn't until later that the damage that was doing became clearer. Coal mines, the classic case of the coal mine. No one, they thought we're in the earth, Mother Earth, what's the big deal? Until, at some point later that came out. And even to this day, our understanding of how, what we do and what we use and how we use it impacts the environment. We're continuing to learn that.
Mm-hmm.
And curiously enough, if you think about it, chemicals, there's not a chemical on the planet that's not made out of something that wasn't already here.
Right.
And it's not like a rocket didn't land with all this poison on it and start to spread it around. It's all of this stuff has always been here. It's the way that it's being implemented, the way that it's being used, the way it's being mixed, and it can no longer, you glue stuff together, you can't take it apart. That's the process that's causing the problem. But it is, I really do think it's an interesting point to consider that this is all, all of this stuff has always been here. Except for the few whatever asteroids that have landed on Earth over the years since.
Mm-hmm.
Well, part of my thought is that part of the discussion in the early days about photography it came about because of the lack of understanding, the lack of education of the general population, and therefore the lack of understanding on how it worked. Whereas painting at the time, even though the miniaturists did phenomenal jobs of rendering people's faces, that was understood. You could see it happen. There was a brush and paint, and it was applied. So that the scientific aspect of it, which goes on today, there's vast numbers of people who don't believe that we ever went to the moon, that you can do this with medicine or chemistry. So that's consistent with just human beings and human nature.
Right.
You know, the aspect of contemporary photography where we all have a camera that we can also make phone calls with is it's now the image making is ubiquitous, and that's not even thought about how it's done. So, you know, there's all this. I mean, photography is still a big part of our life, as it has been since the 1839. Whereas today, you know, I believe that, you know, part of a slogan I have is we photograph to see, in order to see. I mean, people are standing in a place and they have to take a picture of it so they can see what they're looking at. It's like that. The selfies and the billions of images that are made every day are all about that. It's like, well, how can I understand it if I don't post it on Facebook or Twitter or whatever?
Excuse me, boss.
You know,
You
so
have a text message.
that's you know, the evolution of photography seems natural in that sense to me.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I mean, if you look at the work of Harold Edgerton, then you know, that takes the idea of seeing the unseen, you know, significantly further. You know, the capturing of the bullet flying through the apple, or
Right.
you know, I mean, just stopping a bullet in midair and turning the process of photography on its head to figure out how to actually do that. You know, it's completely in line with what you're saying, that photography is about seeing. You know, and if I've had, you know, since the 70s, I've been interested in how photography, like how the viewpoint of taking a photograph influences the way the viewer understands what they're looking at. You know, making judgment by how you look at something. You look down, you look up, you put something in a place that's dark or light. You know, transition of emotion through composition. Basically, the same process that a painter or a sculptor goes through, or anything that creates a momentary representation of an idea. Just use rendering in a different medium, you know. And I think photography has given us the ability to very quickly kind of suss out what it is that we want to render and how we want to do that. And nowadays with, you know, the smartphone, I mean, this is actually a studio camera, right? Which I love the idea. You know, I love photographing with my iPhone. But yeah, so it's about seeing, you know, and then James, you're touching back on education, which of course is key. People not understanding how it works. You can understand that if you work hard enough, you can learn how to paint, theoretically. Like the mechanics of it. You know, how do you do that? And the camera, there's nothing to it.
To learn.
Yeah, it's just
Right.
like it's a box. And push a button, click, and something magically pops out that looks just like something that someone spent 10 years learning how to do. Takes,
Well,
you know, a whole
the
day.
ubiquity of the phones, I think, gives more credibility to people working film, because there's still that mystery around film and the processing and printing that people that take images, make images, take pictures all the time don't understand. And so
Yeah.
there's that appreciation for the old-fashioned way of doing things.
Although to that end, I would also challenge that that's a temporary conversation because, I've always been a proponent of the fact that the picture or the technology used to create the message needs to be appropriate for the message being created.
Yeah, I agree.
And,
Yeah.
I mean, the magic, as magical as the chemical process of photography is, as magical as, the handcraft of painting or the skill set of sanding and polishing marble is, all these things, they're fascinating, but those are all, a good example or a good comparison is martial arts. Those are all things that you do to become a master. You have to do them. You have to know your craft to actually be able to expand beyond your craft into the intellectual part of what you're doing. And Sanders speaks about this, I think, in his 5th lecture, which is the one that's been published already, where he says you need to understand the mechanics of photography to become a master photographer. And in music, I had this with guitar lessons, which I had for many, many years. My teacher always said, you have to remember this and you have to forget it. It has to be so ingrained into you that you no longer think about it, because that's the point where you can become free, where you're no longer hindered by anything that you're using. It just becomes an extension of the idea. And then, of course, you could get into things like where Cy Twombly comes in and says, well, yeah, but I want to draw now like I'm a baby, like a kid, which is fine. But that's after the fact. Or, Picasso was an extraordinary painter, technically an extraordinary painter. He chose to paint the way he did because that was his cognizant decision to do so. And I think in photography, it's similar. There's a lot of, well, in the arts in general, there's a lot of people who are more worried about saying something they are about the actual skill of saying it. And that makes it a bit challenging to filter through, because there's some really great ideas and some really great material that could be made if the people who were doing them just worked on the craft more, which sounds like an extraordinary arrogant thing to say of me as a gallerist. But I think it's really key to understand, what is the technology? What are you using? How are you using it? And because it all ends up coming down to the message. What are you saying?
Yeah, the distinction between a person that takes a nice picture that you could make a print and hang on the wall, and an artist is the conversation. What is the conversation here? I mean, you can have, yeah, that's a pretty landscape. What's the conversation? Well, you look at Adam's photographs and you can see that there is a conversation there. It's not just a pretty landscape. I think that's true with any medium in the arts. If you're painting, you're making prints, or sculpting, is like, what's the conversation here, and what's, therefore what's the message? The distinction between just carving stone and having a conversation.
Indeed.
Because there are a lot of nice photographs out there, but you got to look at them and go, you give cameras to everybody these days, and you're going to have replications of that image. Without meaning to the image. It's like, it's not art; it's a pretty picture.
Yeah. Although in a way, we could be stepping back into the conversation about the role of the viewer in the arts as well, because I don't know if you remember from, I think it was the first or second show that I did where we discussed this, that an artwork that's not seen really has no impact except for the person who created it, if that.
But isn't that the job of the artist, to create the conversation and enroll the viewer in that conversation?
Yeah, it is, certainly. It's kind of a catch-22 situation, or I got into a conversation on Facebook this morning with somebody who posted a poster from 1971. It said, kill all the gallerists and open producer-based galleries, basically like artist-run galleries. And, you know, I thought it was a really cute kind of idea, which is completely removed from any form of rational understanding. As soon as you become a gallerist as an artist, you're a gallerist, and thus you have to literally hang yourself. Like, what do? It's the Suicide Squad? Name the gallery the Suicide Squad? You're in for a day, and then after you've done it for a day, you have to, you know, cut your own hand off or something. What the hell is that? And I think one of the real, one of the greatest injustices of the arts is that almost none of the art made is ever going to be seen by enough people to make an impact. It's just the curse of it. And I wish it weren't the case. You know, I wish there was some way to change that. But if you look at just the sheer numbers, how many meters of wall spaces is on the planet? I mean, you could extrapolate how many pictures could be hung like that. Like how many actual pictures could be hung. There's more pictures than fit on all of the walls on the entire planet, guaranteed, particularly because of photography. I've got cabinets filled with photographs. I mean, I'm an art dealer, so it kind of goes to figure, right? Mm-hmm. But I mean, I showed you guys my house last week. We have like 30 pictures in the house. Out of the inventory that I have, that's about 16,000. And that's just me, right? So it's a real challenge. And most of that work, even the work that I have in the collection that I deal with, is not going to be seen. And it's a real heartbreaker for me as a gallerist to have to deal with that, to understand that the decisions I make, the pictures I put on the wall, I'm making a decision based on what I like, because I have to trust my gut as a presenter of work, as a translator from the artist's voice to the viewer's eyes or the viewer's ears to you know, whatever, you understand what I'm saying. I make decisions and I don't know if they're always right. And it's impossible for a gallerist to know they're right, because a lot of these things you can't really understand them, because I don't know exactly how the audience is going to respond. I don't know who's going to come into the gallery and look at the work, which is another problem in and of itself. You know, how do you get people into galleries? Or, you know, Instagram. I mean, is Instagram a good platform? You see like a never ending randomly filtered stream. It's like looking into somebody's box of 50-cent prints or 5-cent, you know, whatever, drugstore prints, and just like sticking your hand and pulling out a fistful of them and then going through them. And every time you go into that box, you pull out a different fist of pictures. But that's, you know, I think that's one of the curses of the arts in general. That's just the tough luck of it. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, you know, I can't imagine any way to solve that, even if we consider destroying art after it was seen for the sake of making space for new work. And that makes it real challenging, you know, and I know this from museums that a number of larger museums are now running into actual space problems. Like they have no place to put the work. And that's a problem, because what's a painting or a sculpture or a photograph worth if it's in a storage facility somewhere until it turns to dust?
Yeah, we're talking about, a friend of mine puts it this way. He says, art is an obsession with a storage problem until it's sold.
Yeah.
But even after it's sold, there's still storage problems, because not everything's put on a wall.
Right. And so the three of you are artists. So what about the idea of destroying art after it's been seen? Do a show and destroy everything that doesn't sell. That's horrible, right? I mean, I can't, yeah, it's horrible. I know.
Yeah.
I'm just putting it out there because what are we going to do with it?
Even the idea of making a print, you're working in film, making a print and destroying the negative. I mean, even that is abhorrent. It's like,
Yeah.
holy.
Although I think that that's, in a very real way, would be good for the work. There's a number of photographers who would then punch holes in their negatives after they were printed. They would keep the negative, they just take a hole punch and punch a hole in it so that you could still theoretically recreate at least most of the picture. And nowadays you could, of course, go in and just do like a super high res reproduction of a good print of it and then use that as a negative. And as a matter of fact, August Sander did that himself. When glass plates got lost, then he would rephotograph them. He would photograph a good print and print from the new negative.
Yeah.
So, it's possible. But I mean, just the idea that, understanding that there is an end, there's an end to things. That things are finite. That the duration of how long the object exists. We all, I think, as human beings, we tend to not want to deal with the fact that we're going to all die at some point, and the endness of our lives means that we try and attain at least a degree of immortality through the things that we leave behind. This is one of Joseph Devine's main selling points. He would get the Rockefellers to spend ridiculous money on pictures and then give the pictures to museums, all with the promise of having a brass plate on the wall which said that they gave it to them. Said, look, you're immortal now. Your name is going to be on this museum wall forever. He was selling immortality because the Rockefellers didn't care about the money. Didn't matter to them. But I think, the understanding that things are finite is really interesting. And, I was in New York, when was it? 3 trips ago. Dennis Oppenheim was an artist that my father had shown in the gallery once. And I have a portfolio, one of the portfolios that he had done. Each of the portfolios is a bit different because of the way he did his prints. And he said it was an edition of 100, but he only made 15 of them, or an edition of 50, but only 15 were made or something like that. And of those 15, not all of them are complete. So it becomes like this ridiculous thing of like, how do you explain that to anybody? Like, oh, so this is number 8 of 15. Oh, but it says 8 of 50. Like, yeah, he didn't make 50, he only made 15 and so on. Anyways, but what we were discussing was with his widow, was the fact that he also understood that things were finite, that the arts were finite, and most of his work was performance art, similar to Jean-Claude and Christo, their presentations, and then they sell prints of the designs after they've wrapped things in cloth or built things for a while. The entire experience of the arts being temporary, I think, is something that could be really meaningful to help people understand that it does end as a viewer. So you can't always have this. This will go away. And I wish there were actually a way to do that digitally as well. To say, okay, I can find all these copies everywhere of these pictures, and I can make them disappear. I think that'd be fascinating. We spend so much time looking at things that we recognize, and we get kind of tunnel vision into seeing only the things that resonate because we see them so often in the foundation of marketing. And if that weren't the case, and we were used to seeing new things all the time, and that became a desire and a hunger and an experience that we were all engaged in knowingly, then that could have a major impact, not only on the arts, but on everything, on our ability to see each other, see cultures differently, to see new ideas differently, new ways of solving problems, and so on. Sorry, I always riff on these huge philosophical things. My apologies.
No, don't be sorry. Like, I mean, I'm still brought back to the question though, after that discussion. what is it like if we destroy our art after creating it, what is the point? Is the point because there's too much art? Is the point because there's not enough wall space? Or like, what's the message that the artist is trying to send?
It's a good question. I don't have the answer to that.
Because
We don't.
I feel like if you were to take that concept and put it in a different career, let's say I want to open up a restaurant, and I finally open up a restaurant, and then, all right, let's tear it down now because I finished. Sometimes the work needs to live and breathe, and then there comes a time where it's relevant and it's needed, and it has a purpose and it has a voice. And I often find that with my photos, where I take so many photos, I print, I do all this work, but it's not going to mean anything right now. But I know that there will come a time when a photo of someone walking on the street, I don't know, with their cell phone in their hand, like that will be relevant at some point in time, but maybe not now because it's oversaturated. But doesn't it need to live and breathe and like ferment a bit,
Absolutely. And the problem is that there are valid and meaningful arguments for both ideas. One of the first things I taught my daughter when she was in kindergarten, because she would draw, well, she still does, she draws incessantly, is I said, you have to learn to edit. You have to learn to look at what you've done and make a choice for good or bad to say, I'm going to keep this and I'm going to throw this away. That's not, I can't say that as a universal toolkit to everybody. But in her case, it was really important because she was coming home with mountains like this high, like things, paper, and just all this stuff that she was making. And so we'd go through it and we'd pick 2-3 things, and I'd ask her, do you like it? Do you really like it? Is it what you imagined? Or the rule kit or the toolkit I gave her was, tell me if the picture represents what you imagined it should when you made it. And if it doesn't do that, redo it and throw the old one away. And keep doing that. Keep doing that over and over and over, which gave her the ability to not get hung up on the time involved in making any given thing. Because she would look at it when it was done and say, nope, and chuck it again and do it again.
Yeah, and that's part of the process of making art for anybody that's serious about it. It's like you have an idea, you make what you think you made, then you got to look at it and see if that's either the idea that you had, or at least not even a reasonable facsimile. It doesn't have to be. It can just be something like, wow, that's good. It's not what I started out to make, but that's it. But so that's the editing process. And as a photographer, it's much easier to do that, because you can, make multiple images and then you can choose the one you want or the one you thought you had. I mean, obviously I do that all the time. It's like, okay, move it a little bit, do that. And, for some reason, one is much, much better than the other, and it's shot at the same time and very close to each other. All things that aren't easy to grasp immediately.
Yeah.
I mean, I before I really became an artist, I mean, when I was in high school and people would talk about masterpieces, and it's like, well, this is a masterpiece, but there's so many pieces that weren't masterpieces. And my thought was, well, hell, if the artist can make a masterpiece, why aren't all of them masterpieces? Well, I know why, right? It's like, okay, there's more things than just putting paint on canvas or mashing the butt. Yeah, it's all part of it. Serendipity.
Yeah, I think that the expansiveness of that process is key. I mean, it doesn't solve the problem of if all art should be temporary or if only some of it. But James, you're absolutely right. An artist's ability or anybody's ability to do something well, we among jazz musicians, the term of the definition of a professional jazz musician is the one whose worst performance is good enough to be paid for. And that is, you know, I think a fair way of balancing it, because everybody, particularly in photography, everybody at some point was going to take an absolutely astoundingly great photograph, or almost everybody. One.
If you take enough.
Yeah, if you take enough, just statistically speaking, it's bound to happen at some point. But taking one good photograph does not an artist make.
Right.
Right. So, wow. So we've got another conversation filled with loose ends. This sucks.
It's called art.
Making.
Exactly. Well, listen, it's 1 hour, and I'm gonna chop the show off at this point. I think we covered some great territory. Thanks for joining in the conversation. Taylor, we'll be in touch about what we're going to discuss on Thursday.
Yes.
And I'll be posting some stuff. So thank you all for joining me again. And to all
Thank
of you.
you for hosting it, bringing us together.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you,
And to all of
Julian.
those who haven't joined us here on Zoom, if you go to my homepage, Galerie Julian Sander DE/TV, there's a link to sign up for the webinar where you can join in and become part of the conversation if you like, which I would enjoy. So I would hope to see all or most of you on Thursday.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye bye.